Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to our Friday afternoon webinar, Conducting Remote Supervised Visitation in a Time of National Crisis. We are so glad to be here with you all again in this format and to take another opportunity to continue to learn and grow and figure out these uncharted waters together. And so again, we have your friends from Inspire here with you today. Everyone, I'm Jennifer.
I am Beth.
And I'm Amrita.
And we are Inspire. I apologize in advance. We are all a little punchy today, this Friday afternoon, so bear with us. So we are going to just dive right in, but before we do, a couple of things. So many of you got our information about our learning community on facilitating remote visits. We are not going to be able to get to sort of looking at all of the information folks have sent us so far. So if anyone else is still interested, please feel free to go ahead and submit one of the applications through our Wufoo account, the link on the flyer that we sent out, and we will get back to people early next week as we set out to move forward. So please don't hesitate. I know we put a deadline of today, but if you are interested, please go ahead and as quickly as possible, just let us know, and we will be in touch next week about those details. Go to our website, check out our upcoming events from next week. For next week, we have another webinar on Monday and one on Wednesday, and of course our drop-in calls, which I just have to say we've been enjoying so much being with you all throughout the week, and sometimes times of just sitting together, thinking together, and just being a community together. So thanks for all of that. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in.
Before we do that, we just want to remind people that we are recording today's webinar so that we can post it on our website for those of you who miss it. So just to let you know, that will be posted shortly, along with all of the materials, the slide deck and accompanying materials will be posted as well. And then the other thing that we want to remind people is that while we are in partnership with OVW on our grant project, and we try very hard to stay in line with everything that OVW has put forth and supported in this grant project, we are not speaking on behalf of OVW. So we wanted to just make sure that we let you all know that we are speaking from Inspire and work in partnership with OVW. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. And in the chat, Talia had asked us to provide a little more information on the application we were referencing a minute ago. So in response to this current moment and sort of this shift to more remote visitation approaches, Inspire is pulling together a learning community of grantees, for those of you who don't know, to do some intensive thinking and work together to get some tailored technical assistance and to sort of take a deeper dive into trying out new practices and new ways of doing remote services. And so we outreach to all of you to find some grantees who'd be interested in doing this with us and participating. If you look, we should have sent an email out that you may have gotten, but the commitment would be weekly calls, as well as we would be providing intensive TA to the site, calls after visits, debriefs, those kinds of things to kind of learn how things are going and working over time. And then we would create some products that we could share with the rest of the field. So if you are interested, if you didn't get the email, the constant contact with all the information, you can feel free to just email one of us and we'll send you the link. Or if you did get it, there's a link on that constant contact email that there's a quick little application process, just looking for some more information from you all to let us know where you're at and what you're thinking. So take an opportunity to do that, and we'll get back to folks next week. Talia, I hope that answered your questions. If not, we can loop back at another time. So let's go ahead and jump in. And we would like to just take a moment, a time of reflection to just kind of pause and ground ourselves a little bit. And just want to encourage folks to take a minute in your heads and hearts and to just think about what are the things you need right now to feel connected to others. Feel free to grab a piece of paper and jot them down. If you feel so inspired to put them in the chat box to share with others, feel welcome to do that. But this is really just a moment for each of us to sit and pause and just remember and think about what it is we're all needing to feel connected. As always, we appreciate you all being willing to continue to be reflective and to take these moments to think more deeply, to connect with our heads and hearts. I encourage you to take these back to your staffs and teams to have these moments as well, virtually or however you're connecting. I will share one that popped up, and it's surprising how connected I am feeling with time and less structure. I have had many wonderful conversations with friends all over the country. Thanks for sharing that, Connie. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. So with what we just asked you to think about, just in terms of how it is that you are needing to feel connected, we are so amazed and feel so generous in a time where there have been lots of outpouring of support and connection for us to be with you. And we recognize that all of you have reached out to us in one way or another to say that you are very committed to wanting to stay connected to the families that you serve and trying to figure this out in a time that none of us were totally prepared for. And so just remembering all of the ways in which we all need connection and how we feel connected to others, we're so warm-hearted and knowing that you all want to stay connected to the families that you are serving and providing safety to in a way that feels safe and warm and welcoming in just the ways that you've created programming. But at the time that we're at now in our world, things have shifted and changed. And so your willingness to jump on all of these webinars and all of our calls and to touch base with us in an ongoing way to say how can we figure this out together has been incredibly amazing. So we want to thank you for taking time to be thoughtful about how to do a shift and change. And remembering that the things that you have just identified as things that help you stay connected, we want to help you transpose those into the ways that you can help families then also stay connected in a way that feels helpful and safe. So today's webinar is kind of a part 2 of the webinar that we did in March. March 18th was the first part, where we introduced some foundational pieces around modifying supervised visitation and safe exchange services. So we're using that webinar as the launch point. So obviously we're not going to review all of what we did. We have a recording of that on our website and the supplemental materials posted. So you can listen to that. And we would encourage you to listen to that as all of those foundational pieces still hold true. But from where we are jumping off today on this webinar is we're coming with the understanding, and Amrita, do you want to advance this slide? Thanks. So here's where we are jumping off from today, is for all of us to remember that remote supervised visitation will not be safe or appropriate for all families, and that some families will need intensive and heightened level of service that can't be ensured if we modify those services. So coming from that place of understanding, knowing that we may not be able to modify for all families. But there will be families that we can modify service and create touch points and ways of connecting that feel safe, and that we can move to a place of doing that. So as a couple of recommended, Amrita, can you move the slide? So we are putting out there a couple of cautions. The first is we're not recommending it if the adult survivor or the child indicates any fear or risk associated with any kind of remote access. So taking time to make sure that you're not across the board applying in a method or one way of remote access for all families. And then also making sure that it feels okay for all families. Then we're also putting the caution button around any family who has ongoing stalking behavior occurring that you were serving in the past, to reconsider or think about how it is that you would modify any services for that particular family. The other is continued threats or acts of violence, intimidation, and harassment that is happening in an ongoing way for a particular family. And then we're not recommending modified exchanges across the board if there's allegations or finding of child sexual abuse. And of course, all of those caveats come with the fact that every family is unique in their safety needs, their ways in which we can keep them safe. But we're putting the container on there to really hold those particular circumstances that need a lot of extra attention before we move to that. And then we have a couple of proceed with caution moments before we move to a place where we utilize remote services for families in these circumstances. One is if the person who's used violence has used the center to manipulate or undermine or use the center as a platform for ongoing control while using on-site services. So we would put the pause button on that and have you just think about how it is that if you are moving forward, how can you mitigate those concerns? Or perhaps those are the families that you can't adapt services for right now. Then the other pause button and proceed with caution warning that we're putting out there is if center staff has had a difficulty redirecting behavior and on-site visits. And then for all of those families who have not had center-based services that you've already provided in the context of your center before all of this happened, we would also ask you to proceed with caution with those particular families. So that's our framework for just making sure that we're all moving in a thoughtful direction and that we're not applying every modified service to every single family across the board. All right. So the other thing that we want to make sure that we remind everybody is that your role and your function hasn't changed. So regardless of the way in which you are going to modify your services to any extent, we're still charged with ensuring the safety of adult victims and their children and safeguard against further harm. So that hasn't shifted, and that we're still operating under the OVW guiding principles. And that the other thing that Inspire has always said is that visitation centers aren't here to ensure that visits happen, but rather if visits happen, they happen safely. So that's our foundation of none of that has shifted or changed, and that's where we're all coming from in a way to make shifts and changes feel okay. But that's the container that we're still operating from. Okay. So when we think about moving to remote services, there's a whole host of configurations that are possible. And what we mean by that is that the configurations that we're outlining is program staff present with a child during remote access, program staff present with the parent who has caused harm during remote access is also an option. Program staff present with the parent who needs protection, regardless of their custodial status, would also be an option. And then program staff, each parent, and children are all in remote locations as also a service configuration. So what we know is happening in our world, and we're recording this on Friday, April 3rd, 2020, and all of that can change very quickly, but the place that we're at right now is that there are currently only 10 states in our country who do not have a current shelter-in-place mandate. And due to the growing public health crisis that's happening, and the ways in which communities are trying very hard to mitigate the spread, and getting kind of the directive of assuming that we all need to have some sort of mitigation in place, a plan in place, whether we've been mandated for that or not, to think about how it is that we would have to shift to that. So when we're thinking about offering supervised visitation in a way that modifies how we normally do services, the most constrained and the configuration that kind of requires the most thought would be moving to a place where the configuration is that everyone is remote. The staff, the children, and the visiting parent are all going to be, in a different place happening. So that's the launch point for how we're going to explore during this particular webinar, assuming that that's going to be the platform for moving forward. Of course, if you're not in that position, if you don't have a shelter-in-place mandate, or even if you do and supervised visitation services have been named as kind of an essential service that doesn't require you to shelter in place, and that you still have a place that you can go to bring people, we want to help you think through if that shifts or changes, how is it that you can provide this? And then if you can overlay other ways and other configurations of having touch points with particular people face-to-face, that's great. It's much easier to overlay those possibilities than to take it away. So that's the reason we're gonna provide kind of some direction and going this far with services. Okay. So what we're presenting is that if we are moving to everyone is in a remote place conducting supervised visitation, we are recommending that the monitor will always use a virtual platform connection as the way in which they are connecting each party remotely to that. And we'll dig in more. But what we mean by that is it wouldn't be a situation where the monitor would use their cell phone only and call into a conference line or call in and join parties together on FaceTime or conference call, add all of those things that we are saying that the monitor should always use a virtual platform, regardless of how you're gonna connect everyone else together. Okay. So remote supervised visitation connection options then have a couple of different options. From a virtual platform, you have the opportunity to then connect everyone then who is joining that session by phone connection only. So no one else would be on the virtual platform with you. They would use a phone number and call in and be connected only by phone. There's also the option of then connecting everyone by video only. And then there's also the option of doing some combination of all of those simultaneously. So one party might be on the phone and the other party might be a virtual video connection. So that all of those are possible within a virtual platform. So here's what you then kind of think deeper about, is that if you have everyone connected on a virtual platform that you as the staff are in control of, you can then figure out where your touch points need to be with each parent and with each child in order to feel that you've addressed everyone's individual family's safety needs. So for some families, you may ask to have a video audio connection with the visiting parent during that visit so that you can maintain visual sight of where they're at, that you can ensure that they're not moving around during the visit, they're stationary in a location, if that's a concern for that particular family. But you could also configure it for another particular family where there's concerns that the child needs to see you during those visits and have that touch point. You can then figure out how it is that you can make that connection with that particular child during those visits. So all of those are possible if you as a staff are utilizing the virtual platform and then deciding how you're connecting everyone together. So there are a couple of considerations. Well, there's going to be more than a couple. There's a couple of slides of considerations. I'll give the disclaimer there. But your virtual platform that you are going to kind of vet and figure out based on your program needs, your infrastructure that you have available to you, your budget, all of those kinds of things. We have some recommendations that we'll share at the very end. We have some possible platforms that people can investigate and look to. But we've identified about 10 things that any virtual platform should have in order for you to move forward with your considerations around utilizing this for remote sessions. So the first is obviously that it has both a phone and video connection within the same call. And so for example, right now on our call today, we have the majority of people calling in on a computer connection so that they can see the slides, they can see us. But then we also have a number of people who have joined this webinar just by their phone, that they don't have their computer, they're just listening to this over their phone. So that's what we're talking about, is that within each platform, both of those things can happen simultaneously. The other thing that we're asking you to make sure happens is that you have a password protected meeting code or login particular to that particular connection to join. And that particular safety feature is ensuring that no one else can then, who hasn't been invited, to join or hack into that connection, that session. So making sure that you have an encrypted connection and that it's password protected are ways in which you can ensure that that safety feature of not moving to a place where something confidential could get posted, it creates that level of protection. Okay. The joining controls that allow the host to join when you're ready. So there's a function, like for example, before we started this webinar, we had you all in a waiting room of sorts, kind of on hold. And then when we were ready to join people to our call, we had the ability to control that. We had the functionality to push the button to say who we can have join the call now or keep them in a waiting room function. And that allows us to have control over how and when we're joining people together. And that would be true for anybody on the phone or anybody on their computer, that we can make sure that we're not joining people or they're joining without us present. Okay. Host-only controls are also something that happens in a virtual platform. And there are a couple of things that you want to think about in terms of host-only controls that are essential. The first is a mute function. So as a host, we have the ability to mute and unmute both audio and video connection instantaneously in a virtual platform. And that's really important when we're joining remote sessions, is that we no longer have people in place in person with us to do interventions and to account for things that are unsafe that are happening. We don't have the same response time that we would, or the same means of interventions that we normally would have. So the mute function allows us to have a safety feature in place that if we have to use it because something unsafe is happening, either audio, somebody's sharing something, or something visually is happening behind the scenes or in the video session, that we have the ability to stop that from happening instantaneously, put a pause on it. And then we also, in a virtual platform, we're encouraging you to make sure that your host controls allow you to move people out of the session. So you can put them back into the waiting room, for example, and remove them from this session if there needs to be a time when you need to take a break or you need to talk to somebody during that visit. You have the ability to move people around. Okay. Couple more. Prepared you for a couple of slides of these, but here's the last considerations in terms of your virtual platform, is that the breakout session possibility, so there's a waiting room possibility, and then there's also a way in which you can have breakout sessions, so that if there are other things that you need to manage or mitigate, you can move people into another space separately or all together. Instantaneously. It's just a click of a button that happens. And then the host only monitoring, we can see when we're the virtual host of calls or webinars or things, we have a list of everyone who's connected to this line. So we can see who else has called in. We can see if somebody new joins. So we have this visual ability to make sure that what's happening behind the scenes we're aware of, that there can't be somebody who has secretly joined or silently joined, that we are fully aware and we're notified. Then the ability to then mask all of the call-in numbers. So if we're joining people by their computer or by their phone, that we have the ability to rename and change all of those numbers before we join people together, so that no one's phone number or video or IP connection is disclosed to the other people who are joining this call. So if we so choose to just make it blank, or we can just give names of people on each line that people visually see, we have the ability to do that. And then we also want to make sure that then any features that are additional on platforms, like it's not unusual to have a chat feature on a virtual platform, for example, that we want to make sure that we're in charge of being able to turn it on and off and to monitor it, so there isn't any behind the scenes conversation happening without our knowledge. And screen sharing mode, that we have the ability to turn that on and off too, so that someone else can't control what's visually being seen or what's being said without us knowing what's happening there. So those are the features that we would encourage you to make sure you have the ability to control when you set out to do remote sessions. And again, you may never need to use or want to use the virtual platform where you're connecting people face-to-face for some particular families, but you have that ability to change that if you so choose, or if things are moving okay, or people's anxiety about being connected remotely changes. You've worked out the kinks with particular families, or you've built trust, then you can look to increasing that connection if you so choose, or for particular families, you may only ever have them join by phone together without them having seeing each other. But you have that possibility within this platform. So we can't stress enough, practice, practice, practice. So we encourage you, before you move to bringing families into this platform, that you become familiar with all of the possible features and how they work, and test it out with each other, do practice sessions with all the staff, have everybody have the opportunity to be the host so that they can see how they can control things, stop things, move people around, rename numbers before you're joining people. All of those take time and the ability for people to feel comfortable doing all of those pieces. And then we would encourage you, as you know, at Inspire, we love those role plays. So we would want you to just do some mock role plays on your virtual connection together as a staff, and figure out how it is that somebody can circumvent it, how it is that you can change things along the way. If you need to pull somebody out of a visit, if you need to mute their line, everybody needs to feel comfortable and confident that they can do that without the reliance of their manual in front of them or all of those things. Like, that should be seamless for you all. Okay. So I'm going to pause there and just look at the chat if there's any. Okay. Some options. Yes, so we do have some possible platforms that you can use. Gotten that question. And then the specifics. So we have specifics. Here is what we would want to have you think about, is that the very first thing is the length of in-person visits shouldn't automatically transfer to the length of remote visits. So shorter visits is what should be considered. We're making the recommendation to first, as a staff, think about remote connections for 15 minutes. So think about that, not across the board, but thinking about how it is that that would be your starting place. And then when you talk about individual families and making a plan for their connection time, you can go with that as a starting place in the back of your mind to say, does 15 minutes for this particular family seem way too long for their first connection time? Or are they accustomed to already having phone visits outside of the center in the past, and that they're used to talking to each other already? That those particular families, you might not need to start with that 15-minute container, but just in terms of how you're organizing your staff around how this feels manageable, we would ask you not to think about those 2-hour blocks of time for a remote visit, and think more of how can we manage this for 15 minutes as your starting place, and then move from that place of some families you may only connect with for a few minutes each and every time, based on the age of the kids, based on their unique safety considerations, based on accessibility. For some families have very limited ability to connect. So they might have a cell phone with a very limited cell phone data plan, or they have very unreliable internet connection. They live remotely and they don't have kind of a stable way to connect that way. Their cell phone may not work well where they're living. All of those things you'll need to kind of take into consideration in terms of how you're connecting people and the amount of time that you're asking people to then be connected, if there's some limitations around that. Okay. So then the next thing we want to think about is the parameters that you outline in your agreement and your understanding of the things that you want to set forth before you set services up. So there are a couple of things that we would ask that you set in place as agreements for all families moving to virtual. And the first one would be recording. So when you don't have somebody in the center with you, it is much harder to manage and mitigate some of these other things that happen behind the scenes that you would have no way of knowing. For example, using a separate recording device that's put off to the side that you can't see, or if you're only on a phone connection that you would never obviously be able to see that, and you wouldn't know that it's happening. So setting forth some agreement about not recording any portion or any visit in its entirety under any circumstance would be an agreement that we would ask you to consider putting in place. And then also setting up an agreement not to take photos or screenshots during any visit. So those would be the two things that across the board we would ask you to seriously consider for all families. And then creating a plan for how you're going to intervene if there's an issue, with the caveat that as a staff person, if there's risk or harm being caused, that you as a staff person will do whatever is necessary to interrupt that behavior. So the understanding that you have the ability to mute people instantaneously or to move people out of the visit instantaneously. And so letting people become aware of the fact that that's what will happen if you can't mitigate the risk or the harm that might be caused. But then also talking through about other options, like, excuse me, I need to get your attention, you know, whatever it is that you can do short of pulling them or muting the circumstance, but making sure that you're having discussions internally about how you're going to do those interventions and then transposing that to how you're communicating that to participants. Here are some other considerations that we want you to also then think about in terms of mitigating each possible safety concerns unique to each family. So thinking about how you're going to address guests joining visits. For some families, you may decide that guests during a remote service is not going to be possible. You can't manage it. It's something that is too risky for you to move forward with for particular families, and so you're going to want to think through how it is that you're going to put that in place for those particular families. You may come to a place where you have families who you feel like you could manage that, and then you're going to want to figure out how you're going to ask them to join, whether you're going to ask them to join with another remote connection, either phone or visually, or that if they're within the same house, that they would be on a speakerphone with the one parent or the child, something like that. So there are possibilities within this configuration, but knowing that you want to think through how it is that you can manage that based on each family's needs. And then you're also going to want to think about, in terms of how you're connecting people, is that you're going to want to mitigate disclosure of confidential locations or personal details. So if there is concern for a particular family around where they're at, where they're living, the details of where they're living, and you feel like a visual connection would compromise those aspects of that safety for that particular family, then connecting them virtually takes a lot of extra consideration, and you might ultimately decide that you can't mitigate that risk and that you would not connect them visually for those reasons. So just thinking about where people would take a virtual call if they're connected by video, what's in the background, what they have that they're concerned about. So if they, live in a place that you can hear traffic, or you can hear church bells, or you can hear things that would happen during visits that would immediately disclose a particular location or a particular area. If those are concerns, then we want to mitigate that and figure out how it is that we can be ahead of that, and how it is that then we will virtually control for that. And then also thinking about what else happens if who they're living with, or who could potentially pop up or listen to visits, and talk with families about what their risks are, what their concerns are, and then thinking as a staff of how you're going to mitigate that the best way possible. All right, then I mentioned this earlier, but also considering if you have the person who needs protection connected in a very particular way, you also want to think through with the parent, with the parent who needs protection, What their concern would be is if you can't see them visually during that visit, if they're just on the phone, the person who has caused harm can very easily move locations during a visit. So you want to think through how you're going to manage and mitigate that as much as possible if that's a concern for a particular family. Great. So we know that when people get to see each other, there's a different connection that happens. And so virtual connections are very appealing. They help humanize those connection times. They help families feel more engaged with each other. It's helpful to see each other. It also helps as a monitor when you're watching visits that you have a easier time kind of managing those nonverbal cues that are happening. Who's kind of talking, who's over talking, you know, all of those things are managed much easier if you can see what's happening. And so we get the desire to bring people visually together. And if it can happen in a safe way, we would encourage you to think about how it is that you can make those connections happen. But also to know that you want to make sure that you're managing risk and safety above all. So sometimes you won't be able to bring families visually together. So thinking about how it is that you want to be ahead of thinking about those challenges. And knowing that one size will not fit all for all families. So approaching this in a way that you will address concerns family by family and mitigate risk family by family, so that you're not transposing everything that you do the same for every single family. Okay. You also want to help staff think through with every family that you're gonna introduce remote connections for. You as a staff are gonna wanna think ahead about any unintended consequences that can pose risk. So coming and brainstorming, what do we know about this family? What do we know about serving this family already? During on-site visits, what were the things that caused concern? How could that be used in this new platform? And then also not just talking amongst yourselves, but then talking to the person who you're protecting. So the person who needs protection from your center, you're getting information directly from them about what is the potential risk. What are they concerned about? What are the possible things that we haven't thought about that we can address? And then also recognizing that there are different and changing levels of risk that is gonna, we're not gonna be able to predict everything. We know that. We know that that doesn't happen even when people come to our center. And so that's gonna remain ever changing, and we need to be as nimble as possible and ahead of things as much as possible. We also know, and we spent a lot of time yesterday in the webinar talking about the new stressors that families are holding and the ways in which people's needs are changing, and kind of the new and varied risks that families are also faced with during this time. So recognizing that that will change rather quickly for some families, and making sure that we are connecting and having as many touch points as we can with every single person in the family to make sure that we're addressing all of those unique and ever-changing safety risks that could be happening. So we would encourage you, once you do move forward and think about kind of how it is that you're gonna structure this for each family, then think through in very concrete blocks. So for example, you're not gonna schedule this until the end of time, or you know, a whole, this is how we're gonna move forward forever. Is that we're gonna try this once, and then we're gonna make adaptations so that the family knows that you're going to be actively working on mitigating risk and figuring out what's working and what needs to change each and every time you have a connection. And then once you have one kind of way in which you can bring a family together for one time, we're going to ask you then to do some orientation, some thoughtful remote access orientation with a family, with everybody in the family, not bringing them together yet, but allowing them to practice what it is that you've put in place and being really clear about how you're going to connect people. They get to see it and feel it and test it out with you so that they understand what it feels like. They can help then mitigate what feels odd or what didn't work so well, or kind of, oh, I didn't realize this when I called in would happen, all of those pieces. And once you've tested that out with both parents, then we would ask you to do the same for kids and to do a orientation that then brings them into the process so that they get to feel it and they get to test it out and they get to understand and ask questions. And by and large, for most of the kids that you're going to bring in remotely, they'll probably be the most nimble with your remote connection. So they will probably actually be able to test lots of features that you didn't even know you had on your platform. So use their knowledge for good. All right. And then once you get all things set up and you've moved to a place where you're going to have one remote session, also then in advance, think about how it is that you're going to check in and schedule regular intentional time to check in before that actual visit happens and then after that visit happens with every single member of the family. And that's going to be ever so important. We talk about check-ins all the time when you're providing services on your site, in your facility, but now more than ever, it's going to be incredibly important to make sure that you have touch points in a regular way to be ahead of things that aren't feeling good, that you didn't think ahead about, or the need to change up. So those are the ways in which during orientation and during scheduling that you'll want to just be very intentional about also scheduling these moments in time. With a virtual platform, you'll be able to do that, some of that before every visit in the waiting room kind of concept, or moving people to breakout rooms during or after visits as well. So that's another option to have immediately following sessions. But also then there might be times when you can't do that right after. You clearly can't do it right after with every member of the family. So then thinking through how you're going to schedule that in between time. So we have thrown a lot of information at you. For those of you who are just on the phone and not on the webinar, we'll post these slides so that you have access to this next slide in particular. But here are some possible virtual options that you're going to want to explore if you already haven't figured out a virtual platform, to make sure that they meet your needs and that it actually does work with the systems you already have in place, all of those pieces. But there's 4 platforms that you can use as a starting place for figuring out if they'll work for you. And then also on this slide, for those of you who are just on the phone, there's also 2 resources that we're putting up around digital service toolkits that have been put out by Tech Safety. And so those are available for you as well. Right, then the other piece is that OVW is in this with you and supporting how it is that you can meet the demands of families while still keeping families safe. And so we are encouraging you, and OVW is encouraging you to reach out to your OVW program specialist if you have any questions about how you're temporarily changing the delivery of your service and your the deliverables of your grant. So making sure that you're staying in touch with them about your plans, about how it is that you're modifying any services that you're delivering, and making sure that they know that that's your plan, and then moving forward with working with them for approvals and transition, and if there are costs associated that you obviously didn't plan for, that you can talk to them about how it is that you can budget for or move funds around so that you can support the costs of the things that you're going to want to have in place. So I will pause to see if there are other questions that pop up in the chat for just a minute around just the logistics of all of that. Did you all, Jenna or Martha, see anything that we didn't address?
I think we addressed everything
Yeah.
that can.
And we know that once you start wrapping your head around all of this, it feels a little overwhelming. It feels like a lot to think about all at once. And so we also just encourage you to not feel like you have to have all of this figured out instantaneously. We just, as a staff, come together and figure out just bite-sized pieces, one at a time. And if you find yourself going in the what if or yeah but or all of those moments, to pay attention to that and give yourself pause to say, okay, what it is that we have figured out thus far? What feels good? Reiterate that, and then start over with your thinking. What's getting in the way? What are we feeling fearful around? What is it that doesn't feel like it's working well? And keep going back to manageable bite-sized conversations. Because if you think about all of the possibilities and all of the what ifs and absolutely every family that you're serving all at once, it feels unmanageable. And it almost feels to a place where we can't move forward. So start in a place where you even choose the 3 families that you all agree this would probably be okay to test out, and start from that place. And then think about it in the context of those 3 families that you all feel good about moving forward with. How will it work for them? What are their unique circumstances? What would we want to have in place? And then as you kind of get that managed and in your mind, it will feel better. And you can move to then the next layer of questions or possibilities or ways in which you can think to the next stage of all of this. But we encourage you that too much is too much sometimes. And when you kind of slow down and just say, let's give pause and a break and figure out what it is we know for sure, and then go from there. Sometimes that feels better. So, I'm going to read this because I forgot that there are a few people just on the phone. But we have a slide up that I think it's a good reminder for all of us that we, all of us, are currently going through a collective traumatic experience. Trauma is often thought of as too much, too fast, which is exactly what's happening. Of course you're exhausted. Of course you're afraid. Of course you're overwhelmed. Of course you're clinging to certainty in the midst of so much unknown. Of course you aren't as productive, feeling foggy, or wondering how you can possibly go through so many waves of emotions all on the same day. This all makes so much sense in the context of our circumstances. Be gentle with yourself, have compassion for your process, give yourself grace. You are good, no matter how you're managing this completely new experience. That's from Lisa Olivier. We found it online, and thought we would share that with you to give you a moment of pause, to allow yourself some grace. And know it's hard. And we're all doing the best that we can every moment of the day. So.
Thank you, Beth. And to help support you through this uncertain time, we do have more webinars coming up. On Monday, we'll be discussing supporting children and youth during modified supervised visitation safe exchange services. And we'll have Erin Fairchild here as our guest expert. And then also for every Wednesday in April, we'll be hosting a webinar, just like today, except on Wednesdays. And the next one coming up on April 8th will be working with parents who have used violence during modified supervised visitation and safe exchange services. Just to kind of, if you didn't get the email about the webinars, please chat it in the Zoom webinar chat box right now so that we can make sure that you got those emails and those notifications. But just in case you don't, or it's still ending up in your spam, please go to our website. Everything is listed there under our COVID-19 SV support page. We will also be hosting our drop-in support sessions. We'll be continuing with them every Tuesday and Thursday. It's really lovely to see everyone come in, come join, say hi to one another, and just sort of hear where everyone else is in the process. And I think that's been pretty somewhat healing for all of us during this uncertain time. And we also, as Jen said earlier in the presentation, in the webinar, about our learning community application to sort of explore how remote services and virtual services are looking to you. And so please be sure to apply if you're interested. All that information is also on our inspireactionforsocialchange.org/COVID-19 SV support. Connie just chatted in, where is the best place to confirm times of the webinars? Oh, thank you, Jen, at our website. And then once again, Inspire Action is here for you. You can call or text anytime. You can email us. We have an open door policy, evenings and weekends included. So thank you, everyone. And if you have any sort of lingering questions, please feel free to chat them in right now. We have a couple of minutes together. Anything else, Beth, Jen?
I just want to encourage everyone to take some time this weekend for yourselves, to nourish your hearts and your families, and just to share a lot of gratitude for each and every one of you who continue to join us and engage in this conversation and this journey in such a just thoughtful and open way. And it's we are just grateful for this community, and thank you all for being a part of it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Michael. Can end.